Hi there, I'm Ben Morton, and welcome to another episode of the Leaders Kitbag. It's the weekly micro edition of my podcast. Each episode is just 6 minutes long and is designed to provide you with tips, tools, and tactics around specific aspects of leadership and management. It addresses some of the most common challenges you will face as a leader or manager. They are all recorded unscripted whilst I'm out walking in the countryside, so you'll probably hear birds tweeting in the background or just ambient noise as the people around me are going about their day-to-day life. That's all I'm going to say by way of an introduction, so let's dive straight into this week's episode. In today's episode of the Leaders Kitbag, we're talking about the good old feedback sandwich. If you've been in the workplace for more than a year or two, I suspect at some stage you have had to eat one. And if you're in any sort of leadership and management position, then it's likely you have served one at some stage to the people that you lead. And if you don't know what the feedback sandwich is, it's when we sandwich a piece of developmental or perhaps negative feedback between two positives on the assumption or belief that is a good way to deliver feedback. When the reality is, many of those assumptions are false. And that's what we're going to talk about in this episode of the Leaders Kitbag. Why those assumptions are false. We're going to look at some of the empirical evidence around the feedback sandwich. And at the end, I've got one obvious, perhaps, solution that will help you give feedback in a way that lands much better, much more effectively with the people that you lead. So, to the feedback sandwich. It's largely based on three key assumptions for us as leaders when we're thinking about using this technique. Number one is that we assume that it's easier for people to hear the negative feedback if it comes with a positive or two. But that's largely false. If you ask people, how would you like to receive some negative or developmental feedback? My experience suggests that most people will say, just give me the meat. Just give me the feedback and don't worry about sandwiching it between two pieces of positive. So that's the first assumption, that it's easier to receive the negative with some positive. The second assumption is that it gives a balanced approach. But it doesn't, does it? Because the feedback sandwich is two positives to one developmental. So straight away, that's not balanced. And then if we continue this supposed logic around it being balanced feedback, it doesn't hold up, because let me ask you a question. Every time you give a piece of positive feedback, do you feel the need to balance it with a piece of negative or developmental feedback? I suspect not. And the third assumption is that by delivering feedback via this sandwich method, it reduces the anxiety. But that's likely to be flawed as well, because as the server of the sandwich, if you know you're going to have to deliver some sensitive developmental feedback, it's likely you might start waffling or saying extra words and adding extra flavor to the positive because you're trying to delay giving the developmental or negative feedback. So that will make you more anxious. It will create the very thing you're trying to avoid. And if the feedback sandwich is your standard operating procedure as a leader or your modus operandi, then the people you're about to serve the sandwich to know what's coming after this lovely piece of positive feedback is the meat, the piece where they need to get better or the thing that they've not done correctly. So that creates anxiety for them as well. So these key three assumptions that the feedback sandwich is built upon probably don't stand up. And then what's the empirical evidence and research around this? Well, actually, looking into it, there's very little. But one of the most recent studies into this, which was based on a very small sample group, found that the best performance improvement came when we gave the negative or developmental feedback followed by 2 pieces of positive feedback or positive affirmation. So it's almost meat, bread stacked on top of each other. So we've got slightly conflicting views here. The logic says the assumptions don't stack up, but there's one very small study that suggests just give the developmental feedback and 2 bits of positive affirmation might lead to the best performance improvement. So what's the answer? Well, very simply, I would suggest asking people how they would like to receive negative or specific developmental feedback, and then give them what they want. Simple. That's it for this episode of the Leaders Kitbag. As always, I hope it's been useful. Look after yourself. Look after those you've got the privilege and responsibility to lead. And until next time, lead on.